The galaxy was a different place now. What had once been a vibrant and interconnected collection of planets was now a broken, silent wasteland. A war unlike any other had torn through the stars, leaving countless worlds in ruins. The Zorathians, an advanced and ruthless alien empire, had invaded with terrifying force, bringing devastation to the United Galactic Federation, UGF. Their weapons were far beyond anything humanity had seen before, and in the end, the Zorathians had left only ashes in their wake. Billions had died. Once thriving cities were now ghost towns, their buildings broken and abandoned. The stars that had once guided explorers were now distant reminders of a lost golden age. Hope had nearly faded from the hearts of the survivors. People on the few remaining safe worlds tried to rebuild, but it seemed like an impossible task. The universe was too vast, and their resources too few. Among the survivors, there was a small group of humans who had been scattered across the galaxy. The wars had left them isolated, and many had forgotten the shared history that once united them. Earth, long considered a center of civilization, had been among the first to fall, its mighty cities crushed under the force of the Zorathian invasion. Yet, not all was lost. There were still pockets of survivors, especially on remote colonies far from the battlegrounds. On one such colony, a small world named Orcs, the last remnants of a human fleet had regrouped. Orcs was far from the war's front lines, but its isolation didn't protect it from the scars left by the conflict. The planet was barren, covered in dusty deserts and dry hills, with a few scattered settlements that had managed to hold on through sheer willpower. Commander Jace Martell was one of the few remaining leaders of the UGF fleet. He stood on the edge of a cliff on Orcs, gazing up at the dark sky. The stars above looked empty, distant, almost like they were no longer a part of the same universe. Jace felt the weight of it all. His fleet, once a proud symbol of the Federation's power, was now a tiny group of ships, most of them damaged, many barely functional. He could hear the distant hum of the engines, a reminder that their fight was far from over, but he could also feel the uncertainty in the air. The last few years had been hard for everyone. Food and supplies were scarce. Hope was a rare thing these days, something people clung to only out of habit. It wasn't just the war that had taken everything from them. It was the sense that the galaxy had given up. The message from the Federation, once full of promises of peace and prosperity, had become nothing more than a faint memory. It had been years since the last official communication had been sent. Everyone had assumed that Earth was lost forever, along with the ideals that had once made humanity proud. But as Jace stood there, looking at the horizon, he heard something strange. A soft beep echoed in the air, coming from the communication console attached to his wrist. It was faint, almost too quiet to notice at first. But then it repeated, clearer this time. Someone was trying to send a signal. At first, Jace thought it was just a glitch, a mistake. But then, a voice came through, fragile and desperate. "Please, anyone, hear me." It was a voice full of fear, but also full of determination. The words were broken, as if the person speaking had been through unimaginable hardship. Jace's heart skipped a beat, a distress signal in the middle of this forgotten corner of space. That was impossible. No one had heard anything from other civilizations in years. The Zorathians had wiped out communication hubs, leaving nothing but silence behind. "Please," the voice continued, We are survivors. We need help. The Omen, they are coming. Please." Jace's mind raced. Omen? He had never heard of any group or species by that name. It sounded like something out of an old legend, a myth to scare children. But the urgency in the voice was unmistakable. Someone, somewhere, was still fighting. Someone had survived. He wasted no time. Without hesitating, Jace transmitted a signal back to the human fleet. "Prepare the solstice," he ordered. "We've got a mission. Gather the crew. We're going to answer a call." The galaxy had seemed lost for so long, but now, at the edge of nothingness, something new had sparked. Humanity's story was not over. It was only beginning. Commander Jace Martell stood on the bridge of the Solstice, his eyes fixed on the glowing console in front of him. His fingers hovered over the controls as the ship's engines hummed beneath him, a steady reminder that they were leaving the familiar desert landscapes of Aureus behind. The distress signal was still repeating in his mind, each word carrying the weight of a promise or a warning. "We're heading to the coordinates now, Commander," Lieutenant Sarah Acker said, breaking the silence. She was the ship's navigator, and her voice was calm but steady, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. "It's going to take us 3 days to reach the source. The path is clear, but there's something strange about these coordinates." Jace turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What do you mean, strange?" Acker glanced at her screen, then back at him. "They're not in any mapped star system. There's no sign of any major planet or colony nearby. In fact, there's nothing. Just empty space." Jace's heart skipped a beat. Empty space. Acker nodded. "Exactly. It's almost as if the area's been deliberately erased from all records." Jace didn't like the sound of that. It wasn't uncommon for military operations to be classified or hidden, but for a place to be erased from all charts. That wasn't normal. It made no sense. But there was no time to waste over questions. There was someone out there who needed help, and Jace had made a promise. "Keep an eye on the sensors," Jace instructed. "Something doesn't feel right, but we're not turning back." The crew of the Solstice was small, barely more than 30 people in total, but they were experienced and loyal. They had survived the war, after all. Everyone knew their role. Lieutenant Acker was focused on her controls, while Sergeant Omar Reed, the ship's chief of security, stood nearby, monitoring the crew's readiness. The rest of the crew went about their duties, preparing for whatever might lie ahead. 3 days in deep space was a long time to think. As the Solstice cut through the quiet blackness, Jace found himself reflecting on everything that had happened since the war. The galaxy had seemed so full of potential, so full of promise. But now it felt like that promise had been snatched away. The Zorathians had destroyed so much, and for what? Power, control, and then there were the Omen. The name alone made Jace uneasy. Who were they? And why were they targeting whoever had sent that message? He wasn't going to get any answers sitting here, though, so Jace turned his attention to the mission at hand. He walked over to the communications officer, Ensign Alina Park, who had been monitoring the distress signal ever since they'd left Aureus. "Anything new?" Jace asked. Park shook her head. "No, sir. The signal is still faint, but it's the same message. Whoever it is, they're still out there." "Are they?" "Okay," Jace asked, his voice quieter than usual. He was a leader, but he couldn't help feeling the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders. He was the one who had led them into this unknown. If something went wrong, it would be on him. Park gave a small, reassuring smile. "They're still alive, Commander. Whoever they are, they're tough. We're getting closer to the source, though. We should have a clearer signal soon." Jace nodded, grateful for the reassurance. But as the days passed, his unease grew. The emptiness of space around them seemed to stretch on forever, endless and cold. There was nothing. No stars, no planets, not even a passing ship, just the hum of the Solstice's engines and the occasional beep of a distant sensor. It felt wrong. And then, on the 3rd day, the signal changed. The voice on the other end was clearer now, though still filled with desperation. "Please, someone, please, help us. The Omen, they're coming. We're running out of time." Jace's grip tightened on the console. The Omen, whoever or whatever this was, it wasn't just a survivor asking for help. This was a warning. "Lieutenant, adjust course," Jace ordered, his voice steady despite the rising anxiety in his chest. "We need to get to that source. Now." Acker's hands flew across the controls. "Course correction in progress, Commander. We'll reach it in about an hour." The final stretch was nerve-wracking. Jace watched the stars outside the window blur as they approached the source of the distress signal, the lonely, quiet part of space. They were getting close, but every passing moment felt like a step deeper into the unknown. As they neared the coordinates, the ship's sensors flickered. A soft hum vibrated through the hull, like a distant whisper. Jace's eyes narrowed. There was something there, something hidden. Then, out of the void, a structure appeared, a dark, angular shape against the backdrop of stars. It was a space station, old and worn, but still standing. It was nothing like the sleek, polished stations Jace had seen before. This one looked abandoned, worn like it had been left to decay for years. Yet the distress signal was still broadcasting from within. Jace stood, his heart pounding in his chest. "Prepare for docking," he said quietly. This is it. They had found it. Whatever awaited them inside, Jace knew one thing for certain. The galaxy was not as silent as it seemed. There were still secrets to uncover. And now humanity had a chance to make a difference. As the solstice slowly drifted toward the dark space station, Commander Jace Martell couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The station appeared abandoned at first glance, its once bright exterior now covered in layers of dust and dark shadows. The distress signal had led them here, but Jace had expected more, perhaps a fleet of survivors, a network of allies, or at least some kind of defense. Instead, the station loomed like a forgotten relic of a bygone age, its silence almost deafening. Docking in 5 minutes, Lieutenant Sarah Acker's voice came over the comms, snapping Jace out of his thoughts. He gave a small nod, his hands resting lightly on the command console. His crew was ready. At least, they appeared to be. But Jace couldn't help but feel the weight of uncertainty bearing down on him. The galaxy had been devastated by the war, and after everything humanity had gone through, this mysterious signal could mean anything. The solstice settled into the docking bay of the station with a soft, familiar thud. The hum of the engines powered down, leaving only the low buzz of the ship's systems and the quiet echo of the station's strange, hollow emptiness. The crew gathered their gear, preparing for whatever lay ahead. Jace stood and looked at his crew. "Stay sharp," he said. "We don't know what we're walking into. Stay in pairs. No one goes off alone." Sergeant Omar Reed, the ship's chief of security, gave a quick salute. "Understood, Commander. We'll move out in teams." The airlock hissed open, and a gust of cold air swept in, the temperature inside the station noticeably lower than on the solstice. The crew stepped through, their boots making soft echoes against the cold, metallic floor. The station was as eerie on the inside as it had been on the outside. It was vast, but quiet, too quiet. There were no signs of life, not even the hum of the usual station systems. The walls were covered in layers of grime and patches of flickering lights. It looked as though it had been abandoned for decades. "What happened here?" Lieutenant Acker whispered, her voice barely audible. Jace didn't have an answer. As they moved deeper into the station, the silence grew heavier. The crew's boots echoed through the halls, but there was no response, no signs of life. The doors they passed were locked tight, and the few windows they could see through were cracked and dirty. Finally, they arrived at the central hub of the station. The room was large, a dark circular space filled with broken terminals and old dusty equipment. At the center of the room stood a single figure, a man hunched over in front of a terminal, his hand shaking as he typed something frantically. "Hey," Sergeant Reed called out, stepping forward. "You there? Are you okay?" The man's head snapped up, his eyes wide with terror. He looked disheveled, his clothes torn, his face gaunt from weeks, maybe even months of isolation. His breath was shallow, and his hands trembled as he backed away from the terminal, as if he had just seen a ghost. "They're coming," the man gasped, his voice hoarse. "They're almost here. You have to leave. They'll find you too." They'll find all of you. Jace stepped forward cautiously. Who are you? What happened here? The man's eyes were wide with fear, but there was a flicker of recognition in them when he saw Jace's uniform. You're human. He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes flicking nervously over the crew. You came for us. Jace nodded. We came to help. What's going on here? Who are they? The Omen? The man whispered, his voice trembling. They came from nowhere. At first, they seemed like machines, just cold, calculating machines, but they were alive in a way no one had ever imagined. They came for us, and we didn't know how to stop them. We tried to fight, but they were everywhere. We lost, everyone. Jace felt a chill run down his spine. The Omen? It was the same name the distressed signal had mentioned, but now it was real, tangible, and frightening. The man's hands shook as he continued. They weren't just machines, he said, his eyes wild. They were something else, something older. They fed on us, on our energy, on our thoughts, our fears. They weren't just invaders. They were parasites, and now they're coming. They'll come for you too. There's no stopping them. There's nothing you can do. Jace's mind raced. The Zorathians had been bad. But this was something new, something worse. The man's words were almost nonsensical, but the fear in his eyes was enough to make Jace question everything. Where are the others? Jace asked, his voice steady. Where are the rest of your people? The man looked down, his face drawn in despair. There are no others. They're all gone. You're the only ones left. Suddenly, the room's lights flickered, and a strange hum filled the air, like an electric pulse running through the walls. The man gasped, his eyes widening in terror. They're here. They found us. Jace turned sharply to his crew. Get to the ship. Now. But it was too late. The hum grew louder, and the walls of the station seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The Omen were here, and they weren't just machines. They were something far more dangerous, something no one had ever expected. Jace's heart raced as he grabbed the man by the arm, pulling him toward the exit. But as they moved, the lights flickered again. And then, from the shadows, they came. The Omen. They were more terrifying than Jace could have ever imagined. The solstice was already drifting away from the dark station as the first signs of trouble started. The crew was on board, still shaken by the eerie encounter, but there was no time for fear. Commander Jace Martell stood at the front of the ship's bridge, his mind racing. The Omen were real, and they were coming for the galaxy. Behind him, the crew moved swiftly, securing the ship and making preparations for their next move. Jace knew they couldn't waste time. The station had been a warning, a signal that the Omen were a far greater threat than anyone had expected. But what could they do? How could humanity, with so few resources, stand up to an enemy like this? Commander, we've got a problem. Lieutenant Sarah Acker's voice broke through his thoughts. Jace turned, his expression grim. What is it? Acker pointed to the communications panel. We're receiving an encrypted message. It's from the Federation, but it's not like anything we've seen before. Put it on the screen, Jace ordered. The monitor flickered for a moment, and then a face appeared. It was a woman, her features sharp and tired, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. She wore a uniform similar to Jace's, but hers was older, more worn. Her voice crackled as she spoke. Commander Martell, this is Captain Elena Roth of the Phoenix. If you're receiving this, then you've discovered the truth. The Omen are real. They've been quietly infiltrating the galaxy for years, gathering strength in the shadows. We've lost contact with most of the outer colonies. We don't have much time. Jace leaned forward, his heart beating faster. This was exactly what they needed to hear. Someone else was still out there fighting. Someone who had more information about the Omen. Captain Roth, Jace said, his voice steady. What can you tell us? What's our next move? We don't have much information, Roth replied. The Omen are not just a machine army. They've infiltrated every aspect of galactic life. They are using the very technology we rely on to control and destroy. If we're going to fight back, we need to unite. The Federation has fallen apart, but we, together, can still make a stand. Jace's mind raced. Unite. That was the key. The Federation had been shattered by the war with the Zorathians, but if they could rally the survivors, form a new alliance, then maybe they had a chance. Maybe humanity wasn't finished after all. "What do you need from us, Captain?" Jace asked. Roth hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "We need resources, manpower, and information. There are still pockets of resistance across the galaxy, but they're scattered and disorganized. If we can bring them together, form a new alliance, we might stand a chance against the Omen. But time is running out. The Omen have already begun their assault on the core systems. We need to act fast." Jace nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "We'll do everything we can, but we need to act quickly. If we can unite humanity and our allies, we can stand against them." "Good," Roth said, her eyes filled with determination. "I'll be waiting for your signal. The Phoenix will rendezvous with you at the coordinates we've sent. We'll start the rallying process, but we need you to take the lead. The future of the galaxy depends on it." The screen went black as the transmission ended. Jace turned back to his crew, his expression resolute. "Get ready," he said. "We're about to make history." The next few hours were spent preparing the solstice for the journey ahead. They had a plan now: unite the remaining survivors, rally every world and civilization that still had the will to fight, and strike back against the Omen. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was their only option. Lieutenant Acker began making contact with other ships in the area, sending out messages to any fleet still functioning. The Omen had left the galaxy in chaos, but there were still a few pockets of resistance, and Jace wasn't about to let them fall into despair. He knew the galaxy needed hope now more than ever. Humanity had always been known for its resilience, its ability to stand back up after every fall, and now was no different. As the Solstice jumped into hyperspace, heading toward the rendezvous point with Captain Roth and the Phoenix, Jace couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope for the first time in years. The Omen might have been powerful, but they weren't unstoppable. Humanity had faced threats before, perhaps not like this, but they had always fought back. And now, they had a chance to do it again. Back on Aureus, a small group of survivors watched from the safety of their hidden shelter. They had seen the solstice leave, and they had heard the news. They had been in hiding, afraid of what the Omen might do if they were found. But now, something had changed. Something deep inside them stirred. "We're not finished yet," one of them said, his voice shaking with emotion. "Humanity's not done. They're out there fighting, and we're going to join them." Another survivor nodded. "We've survived this long. We can make a difference." The fire of hope that had been dimmed for so long was beginning to burn once more. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about fighting back. The rallying call had begun, and soon others would answer. The Omen might have thought they were invincible, but humanity was ready to prove them wrong. The solstice sped through the stars, its crew working at full capacity to coordinate their next move. Commander Jace Martell stood at the ship's bridge, his gaze fixed on the dark expanse outside. The rendezvous point with Captain Alina Roth and the Phoenix was just a few hours away, but Jace's mind was already focused on what lay ahead. The Omen were coming, and humanity needed to be ready. "Commander, we've established contact with several colonies," Lieutenant Sarah Acker said, her voice calm but filled with urgency. "Some are willing to join us, but there's hesitation from others. They'd been isolated for so long, they don't know who to trust anymore." Jace nodded. He understood. After the war with the Zorathians, many colonies had been left fractured, suspicious, and wary of outsiders. But if they were going to stand a chance against the Omen, they had to pull together. We need to keep pushing, Jace said firmly. We can't afford to waste time. Every moment counts. Acker nodded, adjusting the communications panel. I'll keep trying, sir. As the crew worked, Jace couldn't shake the growing feeling that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the very soul of humanity. The Omen weren't just an enemy. They were a threat unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. If humanity couldn't unite, if they couldn't overcome their differences, the Omen would destroy everything they had built. He had to believe that wasn't going to happen. He had to. Hours later, the Solstice emerged from hyperspace, the massive phoenix appearing on their sensors. The larger ship was an imposing sight, its hull gleaming despite the years of wear and tear. Jace felt a surge of hope as he saw it, the promise of an alliance that could turn the tide. They weren't alone. They had help. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from Captain Roth, Ensign Elena Park reported. Put it through, Jace ordered. The screen flickered, and Captain Roth's face appeared once again, her expression serious but determined. Commander Martell, I'm glad you made it, she said. We've been making some progress. The resistance groups are starting to rally. I'm meeting with leaders from 3 different sectors this week, and we've got a few more ships willing to join the fight. Jace's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Any sign of the Omen? Roth's expression grew more somber. Yes, they've already begun infiltrating the heart of the galaxy. They're silent, subtle, using our own technology against us. We've lost contact with several systems, and they're spreading faster than we expected. Time is running out. Jace's heart sank. The Omen had always been a shadowy, almost mythical force, but now it was clear they weren't just another enemy. They were a cancer, slowly taking over the galaxy without anyone realizing it. We'll do what we can, Jace said, but we can't fight this war alone. We need everyone we can get. We'll make sure they know that, Roth replied. I'm sending you coordinates for the next meeting. We'll start bringing the resistance together. The transmission ended, and Jace turned to his crew, his mind already racing ahead to the next step. They had a plan, but now they needed more than just a plan. They needed action. The Solstice moved on, jumping from one sector to the next, always staying ahead of the Omen's encroachment. Each stop brought new challenges, but it also brought new allies. Slowly, the resistance was beginning to grow. Some of the systems they visited were skeptical, but most were willing to listen. Humanity, despite the scars of war, was beginning to rally again. However, there was no denying the tension that hung in the air. Jace could feel it even among his own crew. No one knew how long they had before the Omen made their next move. The enemy wasn't just on the move. They were already here, hidden in plain sight, quietly waiting for the perfect moment to strike. During one of their stops, Jace gathered his senior officers in the war room, the walls illuminated by star maps and battle simulations. Lieutenant Acker, Sergeant Omar Reed, and Ensign Park all sat around the table, their faces tense. We're getting more reports of Omen activity, Acker said. It's becoming clear. They're not just targeting military assets. They're moving through the core systems, dismantling any form of leadership. They're weakening our ability to organize. Jace clenched his fists. They're not just conquering. They're erasing us, wiping out everything that could stop them. Sergeant Reed spoke up, his voice steady but urgent. We need a plan, Commander. A clear strike, or we'll be left scrambling when they finally attack in full force. Jace nodded, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. We can't wait for them to come to us. We need to hit them first. We'll use everything we've gathered, every resistance group we've contacted. But we can't do this alone. We'll need ships, weapons, and intel, Acker added. We need to locate their central base. That's where their power is. If we can destroy it, we'll cripple them. Jace looked around at his officers, their faces filled with resolve. This wasn't just a battle. It was a fight for everything humanity had ever known. They were going to take a stand. "We'll coordinate with the resistance groups," Jace said, his voice strong. "But we need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the stronger they'll get. We'll make our move on their central base. If we can take that down, we'll buy ourselves the time we need to fight them off for good." The galaxy was finally beginning to unite. The pieces were falling into place. Now, humanity would face its greatest test. The Omen had underestimated them once, but they wouldn't make that mistake again. As the solstice prepared for its next jump, Jace Martell stood at the bridge, staring out at the stars. There was no turning back now. The solstice cut through the stars, its engines humming softly as it made its way toward the Omen's suspected central base. Commander Jace Martell stood at the bridge, his eyes fixed on the display ahead. The galaxy was still in chaos, but humanity was beginning to rally. The resistance forces were scattered, but every new ship that joined their cause brought hope, a feeling long lost after the war with the Zorathians. "Commander," Lieutenant Sarah Acker called out, breaking his thoughts. "We're approaching the coordinates. The Phoenix is already on standby. Captain Roth is ready to move when we are." Jace nodded, his mind running through the final steps of their plan. This wasn't just an attack. It was a statement. Humanity was no longer on the defensive. They were fighting back. They were sending a message to the Omen and to the galaxy. This was not the end. "Understood," Jace said. "Prepare for deployment. We don't know what we're walking into, so stay sharp." The fleet assembled in the depths of space, a scattered group of ships that had once been part of a larger federation. Now, united under a common cause, they moved toward their target. The Solstice, Phoenix, and several smaller ships made up the core of the force, but there were others, ships that had been hidden away, waiting for the right moment to strike back. Together, they formed a rough but determined alliance. Jace stood on the Solstice's bridge, watching as the fleet spread out in formation. The Omen's base was ahead, a dark fortress surrounded by layers of defense systems. It was well hidden, concealed by vast fields of asteroids and debris, but their scouts had located it. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best shot. Approaching the Omen base, Ensign Alina Park reported, "They've detected us, Commander. We're about to enter their defensive perimeter." Jace's heart skipped a beat. The Omen had been expecting them. This was it, the first true test of humanity's resolve. "Steady," Jace ordered. "Get us through their defenses. We need to buy time for the others." The Solstice shook as it entered the Omen's perimeter. Energy beams flashed past them, narrowly missing the hull. The Omen's ships, strange and sleek, emerged from the darkness, their weapons charging. Jace gritted his teeth, gripping the armrest of his chair. "Engage evasive maneuvers," he commanded. The crew moved quickly, responding with practiced precision. The Solstice darted through the storm of incoming fire, narrowly avoiding several blasts. The ship's shields held, but Jace knew they couldn't keep this up forever. The Omen were too numerous. They had to get inside the base and destroy the core systems before it was too late. "Captain Roth, can you provide backup?" Jace asked over the comms. "We're right behind you, Commander," Roth's voice crackled through. "We've got your 6. The Phoenix fired on the Omen ships, clearing a path for the Solstice to advance. Jace's heart pounded as they made their way through the chaos. His crew was ready. They had trained for moments like this, but there was no way to prepare for the sheer scale of the Omen threat. The enemy's ships were fast and relentless, closing in on them from all sides. "Hold steady, everyone," Jace said, trying to steady his nerves. "We're almost there." The Solstice broke through the final layer of defense, its engines roaring as they shot into the heart of the Omen base. It was a massive structure, dark and intimidating, its surface covered with strange, glowing symbols. The Omen had built this place for one purpose: to control, to dominate, to destroy. Jace's pulse quickened as the ship made its final approach to the heart of the base. "Prepare for landing," he ordered. The Solstice touched down with a soft thud in a large cavernous bay. The team was already ready to deploy, and Jace led them out onto the surface. The air was thick with tension, the walls lined with strange, alien technology. "Stay sharp," Jace said. "This is their stronghold. We don't know what kind of resistance we'll face inside." The team moved cautiously through the base, their footsteps echoing in the cold metal hallways. The walls seemed to hum with energy, the lights flickering above them. Jace felt a strange chill in his bones, but he pushed it aside. They had a mission, and nothing was going to stop them. They reached a large control room at the center of the base, the doors sliding open to reveal a wall of screens. Each one showed different sectors of the galaxy, each one under Omen control. But what caught Jace's attention was the massive central core, a pulsating structure in the center of the room. It was the heart of the base, the source of the Omen's power. "That's it," Jace said, his voice low. "We take that down, and we cripple them." Sergeant Omar Reed moved forward, setting up explosives around the core. "This won't be easy, Commander. They'll know we're here soon enough." "We don't have a choice," Jace replied. "We finish this now, or we lose everything." The countdown began. The core's strange energy pulsed around them, growing stronger with each passing second. Suddenly, alarms blared, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. The Omen had found them. "We've got company," Acker shouted, raising her weapon. "They're coming in." Jace took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. They had to hold their ground and ensure the core was destroyed. "We hold them off," Jace commanded. "Get that core ready." "Sergeant." The battle had begun, and it was a fight unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The countdown was ticking down, the seconds slipping away like sand through an hourglass. The Solstice crew was entrenched in the heart of the Omen base, the fate of humanity hanging in the balance. Commander Jace Martell gripped his weapon tighter, his focus unwavering. He could hear the distant clatter of Omen soldiers advancing down the dark, metallic hallways, but he didn't flinch. They had come too far to turn back now. "Explosives are set," Sergeant Omar Reed called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Core's vulnerable. We just need a little more time." "Make it fast," Jace ordered, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. The walls of the control room hummed with an eerie, otherworldly energy. The central core, glowing with a strange power, was the key to everything. Destroy it, and they could bring the Omen to their knees. The sound of Omen soldiers echoed closer, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. Jace motioned for his team to take positions, and they scattered across the room, each one preparing for the inevitable fight. The walls of the control room were lined with screens, each displaying the Omen's reach across the galaxy. Jace could feel the weight of it all, the lives they had lost, the billions still depending on them. This was the final stand. Lieutenant Sarah Acker was crouched by the door, her weapon aimed at the entrance. She gave Jace a quick nod. "They're close." The countdown continued. 30 seconds. Jace's pulse quickened. There wasn't much time left. He had seen wars before, had fought in battles that seemed endless. But this was different. The Omen were a new kind of enemy, a force that didn't just conquer, they'd erased. Every moment they delayed meant more lives lost to their insidious campaign. Suddenly, the doors slammed open. The Omen soldiers poured into the room, their alien forms moving with unnatural speed. They were tall, with sleek, mechanical bodies that seemed to merge with their environment. Their weapons hummed with deadly intent. "Fire!" Jace shouted. The room erupted into chaos. The crew of the Solstice fought back with everything they had, each soldier using their training to hold the line. The Omen were relentless, but humanity's will was stronger. Every shot fired, every move made was a defiant stand against the destruction that had already claimed so much. Jace dove behind cover, firing his blaster at the advancing soldiers. The Omen's weapons crackled with energy as they returned fire, but Jace and his crew were prepared. They had trained for this moment, and they weren't going to let it slip away. 5 seconds. Reed called out, his voice a sharp command amidst the firestorm. "Everyone get down," Jace ordered. The crew dropped to the ground just as the explosives on the central core detonated. The explosion shook the entire base, a blinding flash of light filling the room. The walls shuddered as the core began to collapse, its strange energy destabilizing in a violent display of force. But the Omen didn't stop. They pushed forward, closing in on the Solstice crew, intent on stopping them before they could escape. Jace knew they had only moments before the entire base came down around them. "Retreat," Jace shouted. "Fall back to the Solstice." His crew moved as one, backing toward the exit as the base around them began to crumble. The Omen soldiers were relentless, but humanity had something they didn't, an unyielding spirit. As the team ran, explosions and energy blasts lit up the halls. The sound of collapsing metal and shattering glass echoed behind them. They reached the hangar bay just as the Solstice's engines roared to life, waiting for them. "Move! Move!" Lieutenant Acker yelled, her voice filled with urgency. Jace led the charge, diving into the cockpit and quickly strapping into his seat. The rest of the crew followed, each one taking their place. The bay doors began to close, but the Omen were still coming. "Take us out, Ensign Park," Jace commanded. Park wasted no time, punching in the commands to power up the engines. The Solstice shot forward just as the doors slammed shut behind them, narrowly escaping the final wave of Omen soldiers. The base behind them erupted in a deafening explosion, sending shockwaves through space. For a moment, everything was still. Jace exhaled slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. They had done it. The Omen's central base had been destroyed. The core, their source of power, was gone. But the battle was far from over. They had won a crucial victory, but the war was still raging. "This isn't over," Jace said quietly, staring at the wreckage of the Omen base on the display. "But it's a start." As the Solstice drifted through space, Jace looked out the viewport, the stars now seeming a little less distant, a little more within reach. Humanity had faced the Omen head-on and survived. They had proven that even in the darkest of times, they could rise up, stand together, and fight for what mattered. The resistance was growing, the alliance stronger than ever. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their galaxy. Commander Jace Martell knew the road ahead would be long. The Omen were still out there, and they weren't done yet. But for the first time in a long while, Jace felt a sense of hope. Humanity had answered the call, and that was all they needed.